Working It Out, a podcast show about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces, our communities, and our lives. A show where we put diversity and inclusion to work.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.
Welcome to Working It Out. I'm your host, Dr. Vanessa Weaver, and joining me today is Dr. Melanie Dillett-Dukes. Melanie recently authored a book titled My Freedom Journey, Be Free, Be Brave, Be Radical. Before I share with you some of the interesting aspects of Dr. Dillett-Duke's background, I just want her to tell us, what is this title? What does the title mean? My Freedom Journey, Be Free, Be Brave, Be Radical. What is that all about, Dr. Dukes?
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited. And yes, that title has a deep meaning for me, just as a woman, as a mother, as an educator, as an activist, and in this DEI work. My freedom journey was very important to entitle it that, because it expresses the state in which we must go on to be truly free. And the space of being free, being brave, and being radical is when we're open and we're free to think the way we want to think. We are brave enough to step into some of the spaces in which we can make change. And being radical is just changing things for complete transformation of people within their personal and professional lives. So that was the thought process behind my freedom journey. And it's just to take everyone on a process of just becoming free in their authentic self.
Well, I just want to tell the audience, before we even get into this deeper, you mentioned the term DEI, and I just wanted our audience to know that meant diversity,
Yes.
equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
If some of them are asking, well, what does that DEI mean?
Yes.
Well, Dr. Dukes, your background obviously prepares you for authoring a book like this, and we're going to get into My Freedom Journey, Be Free, Be Brave, Be Radical. But you spent 20 years in the whole educational arena, first as a teacher. You've taught children from preschool to high school.
Yes.
And then you founded a nonprofit creative community to ignite students' voices. You founded BeyondFree. My goodness, in 20 years, you've done a lot. And it seems that all of that has culminated in this book, because this book really talks a little bit about your journey, or talks a lot about your journey, your freedom journey to be free, be brave, be radical. Am I correct on that?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. It is definitely a compilation of, wait a minute, how can I create something that people can follow along and just move on this freedom journey? Because all the things that I've learned in these 20 plus years of my personal and professional life, I wanted to put it in a book that's easy to use and just move through with a calm spirit of what the main goal is: to be free in yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because a lot of times when we hear the words freedom journey, we think about it in terms of the liberation struggle, right? How do I become a freer Black person, or a freer Latina, or a freer Native American? But yet in this book, it seems to encompass both that, but also your own personal freedom.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book, and particularly now.
Well, with a little bit of my background, I spent 15 years abroad in different countries, because my father worked for the UN. And within those spaces, I experienced so many different cultures, so many different perspectives. But coming back to the United States as a 15-year-old and going into high school and then later on into college, there were some things that I felt that as the American public, what they needed to have and have a little bit more of that basis was, how do we move into the spaces of interacting with people in a more respectful and loving way so that we could truly make change, as well as push for more of a loving environment with people. So within the freedom journey, that's where I decided, like, okay, we need something for professionals and for our personal self. So to start off with the personal part, before we could really interact in a healthy manner, we need to tackle ourselves. We need to find who we are, look at our stories a little bit deeper, and see how our past intersects with our present and how that moves into our future. So going deeper into our personal spaces, which could be so triggering and it could be traumatic and also uplifting, it was very important to move in those spaces and to move into understanding and reflecting. And that was my whole dissertation, was past stories and how my parents, actually particularly my father, has influenced who I am, and both the negative and the positive. Because we can't just move in society thinking, that everything's positive. We need to make sure that we're tackling those tough issues that can be very painful. But we do that so that we don't repeat those cycles, and so that we could be aware of how we're interacting with people and how it could have a possible negative impact on people as well. So tackling our personal self is so essential in this work, when we're moving towards change and we're working towards being more equitable and inclusive in different spaces.
So, I mean, that's interesting, because to me, in many ways, it's sort of like the chicken, which is first, the chicken versus the egg. Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say is that you need to do that personal exploration first, so that you could be much more effective in dealing with diverse individuals and challenging diversity situations. You have to be grounded in who you are and what you stand for and your principles and values. And really, when you talk about the storytelling, to have an awareness of what your own lived experience is.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out, because of course, I don't want you to say, oh no, first you have to explore yourself in particular, but it's very important that you're aware, like you said, you're aware of yourself. You're aware of your background and how it has influenced you, because some people live in a state of, well, that's my story, and I'm going to just keep on pushing forward. But you have to understand the intricacies, the details of how it possibly has impacted someone in a positive, or yourself really in a positive or negative manner. So getting deeper into your story, and being aware of that is the first process, really. And in the book, I have the 4 paths. And in the book, it's not, I always say, to your freedom journey is not linear. You're not going to learn yourself first, and then you're not going to, it's cyclical. You're consistently learning and unlearning certain behaviors that have had a negative or positive impact on you. So you're going through those paths interchangeably, going back and forth. And I tell so many people right now, I'm like, I'm still in that journey. I'm still learning and unlearning, my work or my life experiences, just because some of the negative influences that I've had in my life as well, and trying to just unpack those.
Dr. Dukes, you indicated that you structured this book to almost be like a journey map, right? Where people can complete elements of the book to kind of explore more about their own freedom journey and be free, be brave, be radical. I guess my question is, how does it start? How do they start with your book?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, I just put out there what this book is all about. I want to make sure that I'm pushing people to be transparent and vulnerable. And so I put my vulnerability out there. Of course, not showing all the details, but putting my vulnerability and transparency out there, because it's so important when you are doing this work that you're remaining transparent, and that people are understanding that there's sensitivity in being vulnerable as well, and transparent. So with that, in the book, I start off with path 1, which is knowing yourself, which is your stories. Like, getting to know who you are is critical. And within that, or each path, and knowing yourself, there's spaces for you to freedom dream and freedom do. Path 2 is really connecting beyond yourself. And those are the spaces where, in the stories, is understanding different perspectives. It's so key. And I'm not asking you to believe and absorb the values of people's different perspectives, but it's an awareness that there are different perspectives and yours isn't the right one all the time. And just having that awareness. And then path 3 is self-reflection, connecting, deeper into yourself. But a part of that self-reflection is accountability, because with accountability, you're able to really make the change that you really need to do. Because I used to self-reflect and look at myself all the time and think that I was making some changes, but then I had to have some accountability partners to say, Melanie, you're not really doing much here. This is what you need to do, and to check me on what I need to do to change. Because if you just self-reflect all day long, you're just looking at yourself and you're thinking and from your small perspective that you're actually doing something. But when you're allowed to see someone else to come in, and you have to be vulnerable, you have to put your ego aside, because if you're really on this journey for change, that's important. And the last one is connecting for real change. This is a part of communication. We understand that there's different forms of communication to get out your ideas, your opinions to different people. And so just being aware of all of those things is important.
You talked about your own being transparent and allowing people to see you in a vulnerable kind of transparent way. Can you share with us one of those stories of you?
Sure.
Of the transparent you, the vulnerable you in the book?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think back on a story. I was doing a workshop, and we were speaking on just different perspectives in a space, and I was facilitating the workshop with educators. Now, when dealing with this work of DEI, anti-racist work, there are certain steps in making sure that when you're sharing of yourself, that you have to make sure that you're saying, from the perspective of a Black woman, American Black woman, this is what I believe. And it kind of countered what this white woman was saying in that space. And she was actually a white Zimbabwean. And I actually lived in Zimbabwe at one point. And so I was sharing my perspective with her. And from a Black American living in a colonial at the time, had just recently had their independence when I was there. However, I received an email from her stating that she was not feeling comfortable with me sharing out my perspective, sharing out how felt as if I was alienating her from that space. And then further tried to tell me how to really proceed with my job of facilitating the space. So I had to take a step back. I had to gather myself up, call my community, call my accountability partner, and just share what that space was, because I had to understand her perspective and I had to really interject mine as well. Because as a Black woman delivering this type of work, you have to make sure you're also making sure that people are comfortable. So there was a slight vulnerability there for me to be checked. And I sent out an email, we actually talked and we discussed and shared. And I didn't have that defense mechanism up because I knew that if I wanted to continue working with her and she's working with students, I needed to make sure I was building a strong relationship with her so that we could have that trust together. But there was a level of vulnerability where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's telling me what to do in my space. But I had to check myself. So that's one of the stories.
So was your vulnerability the fact that you became uncomfortable about her challenging you, or that you had to engage in this kind of self-exploration to see if what she was saying had any truth to it? What, in fact, in that story was your vulnerability?
It was absolutely, I love how you pulled that out. It was absolutely that, because I needed to make sure as a facilitator that I was checking myself. So that self-exploration was a little hard because I would like to pride myself in knowing what I'm doing as a facilitator, but I needed to make sure, and that self-exploration deep in going into myself and how I should interact was definitely a little bit shaky. And me even admitting to her, like, I apologize, for making you feel in this space. Moving forward, this is what I could do to help, make sure that you're feeling comfortable in sharing in that space. So definitely checking myself, was a space of vulnerability and going back to her, but then also not compromising the work that I needed to do. So that's definitely one thing, is making sure that you're not compromising the work that you need to do, but then also making sure that you are able to reach the people that you need to reach appropriately. And sometimes it may not work out the same way, because some people may not want to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's interesting that you provided us an example within the context of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work you do, and particularly the anti-racist work that you do, the anti-racism work that you do, because we know that could be but it's often a very sensitive and can be very volatile for other people. And as we deal with this whole CRT movement or anti-CRT movement, it's clear that it could be a real kind of lightning situation. And so you're saying, are you also suggesting that before people can even engage in this kind of work, anti-racism work, or even dealing with it, that they need to kind of make sure they're clear about their own journey and their own freedom journey and what it takes for them to be free, be brave, and be radical?
So I want people to step into this space with an awareness. I don't want them to hold back and say, well, I need to, do my further self-exploration before moving into that space, because we need change and we need it fast. We need the next generation to move and live in spaces where they're thriving and not just succeeding. What I do ask, it's almost something that's working in tandem. They're doing it at the same time. They're stepping in with an awareness that the work needs to be done. There are inequities. There are issues of racial inequities, gender inequities, all these things that need to come into play, but we need to explore ourselves. One of the spaces in the book is talking about trigger warning. It's an activity that I have in the book, and within each path, there are activities of freedom dreaming and freedom doing. One of the things that I put in there was trigger warning. And I put trigger warning in there because sometimes when you're doing this work, DEI work and anti-racist work, there are certain elements that may trigger you. And you need to be aware of those things before entering those spaces. Because as a Black woman, I always have to observe my spaces first and collect myself, because sometimes the spaces that I enter are not completely safe for me emotionally. I've not have entered spaces where I'm necessarily physically feel unsafe, but emotionally and mentally unsafe. So trigger warning is starting to map out what triggers me. And when we're going back into our stories and our histories, it's important to start labeling those even in your personal sense, because with the personal and professional, there might be some connections in those triggering, and then putting those activities together where, yes, you have the trigger warning. Well, what are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop? And what are you going to stop doing? And what are you going to continue to do?
I am just very curious about this, because you talk about as a professional dealing with this to be clear about your trigger warnings. But if we think about this whole CRT movement from the parents' lens, does it also mean that they should pick up this book and really do their own exploration? Because maybe there are some triggers that they have that they need to explore why they feel so intensely against their children being exposed to the history of America, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Oh man, I love that you're asking these questions, because, some people look at the book and they think, okay, this is going to be only geared for, Black parents, Latinx or Indigenous peoples. This is for all people who are trying to see another path or explore themselves. This is for all people. So yes, parents, start the process. This individual, start the process of getting to know yourself and why exactly are these topics triggering for you? And when you're starting to on that journey, and my children, point me out, I tell all the time, they're my accountability partners in a lot of things, because they ask me those questions like, why does that bother you? And be okay with having those questions asked, but then give yourself some grace and time to not even have to respond to it right away. Give yourself the space and grace to reflect and say, you know what, I'll get back to you on that. But to have that visceral reaction to CRT and doing this work, there's something deeper that's rooted in our society. As we know, there's so much deeper stories that are there that needs to be told, that I think America has not had the time to resolve. They have not taken the time to just really think about, why is it that we don't want to see how our nation has developed and what it was actually founded on. It's quite a journey. And if people just take that time, all populations, all demographics, I should say, should just take that time, then we can move towards a little bit of change. I'm not saying this is the complete solution, but I am saying it's a part of our critical thinking. It's a part of our social emotional development. It goes hand in hand.
So I guess this is really relevant. This book is necessary, not only for an individual like yourself or me who do a lot of work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also for those parents and maybe for these politicians.
Yes.
So let me kind of explore this personal aspect of the book. I love the fact that it's a workbook. I love the fact that you have opportunities to journal, to kind of engage in your storytelling. Yes. Why is that storytelling piece so important? And let me just insert this. I ask that because, in our work with alignment strategies, and you've done work with us in our diversity work, we have people engage in identifying their own story. And to my surprise, many times people haven't even thought about what is their story. They haven't really, taken a pause or a break to start connecting the dots. So tell us, why is that storytelling so important in the process of your freedom journey?
Yeah, there's a level of, even when writing this book, and when I was actually writing my dissertation, because my dissertation was about family stories and how it intersects or connects with who I was as a parent and then a wife. And so telling your story opens you up to a whole nother level of being able to connect the dots. And it allows you to go a little bit deeper and reflecting, like, okay, why did that happen? Well, what was that about? And start really pushing those questions so that you could dig a little deeper into yourself. Sharing that, writing, journaling. I'm still a book person. I use my computer, I use my phone for taking notes, but writing it out, sharing it, and it could be on your computer or phone, whatever it is, but actually writing out your story is almost like a cathartic experience, because it feels like you're purging sometimes all of those experiences that you've had that could have been both negative and positive. And it's a hard journey, because sometimes when you're writing, and a lot of people don't really want to take the time to do it, because it can hash up so many different emotions of anger, happiness, sadness, depression. And that's why in the journal, Dr. Weaver, I do put in there meditation spaces, and I have those free videos for people to meditate, to think, and to just reflect, and to have self-care steps for themselves. Because going on this journey, I tell you, I've cried, I've laughed. There's been so many emotions in here because I needed to share who I was, but making sure that also that I'm having self-compassion and grace to understand that it's okay with the decisions that you made at that time. However, what are you going to do moving forward? Because I think people get so stuck on the past. And I think, thinking about this, and as I'm saying it, when we talk about CRT, people feel a level of guilt in those past stories, but that's not what we're asking, or I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is pull out those stories, figure out if there are any connections, and figure out if there's something that needs to be done to change, so that you can make more of a positive influence in both your personal and professional life. Because as we know, those experiences run deep in our body, and those traumas that can be deeply embedded show up in different ways. And this book is just a way to be not reactionary, but to be proactive on your journey of life.
How can we take this freedom journey, your freedom journey book, Be Free, Be Brave, Be Radical, and use it in the workplace. And I ask that because for many of us as adults, the majority of our time, our woke time and energy is at work. And I only say that because, in the last year, like 4 million people and counting have just quit their jobs since the advent of COVID. And I was reading a blog by McKinsey where they talked about for employers, they need to figure out the happiness factor for their colleagues and employees, the people that report to them. What is their happiness factor at work? Because now with people having been sequestered for a couple of years with during the COVID pandemic, they've been thinking about what is my life all about? What is the meaning that I want to attribute to my life? So how can an employer like myself use this book to support identifying points of happiness for the people that are part of my team, for anybody that's part of a work team?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question, because when I actually created the book, it was, for individual, or it could be for a book club or a cohort of people who are really trying to find their authentic self, to live in that space of joy and to be happy. And so when companies begin to really understand the importance of authenticity in the workplace and how it intersects in their personal life as well, then this is the book that they need to start exploring with as a group, as a team. Because within this book, there's snapshots. And I believe I told you this before, I didn't want something that was so wordy and just too much to read, because people, like you said, don't have time. They don't have time. So it's a space where you could quickly go through it. You could actually go to just the freedom dreaming and look at those questions to see where I could go a little bit deeper into myself. And then there's spaces of really pushing you to also take care of yourself. Because when you're really trying to find who you are, it's tough. After years of, not even years, but being a mother and being then a wife, I lost myself and I didn't know what was making me happy. What was my joy? And I had to take that time to do that. And when companies really invest in their employees and take that time, then this is the process to go through. This is where you could have, where you're having coffee time or coffee chat, especially in our virtual world. And you could say, hey, let's go to path one and let's do some of the activities in that space. One of it is history of your name, and doing a quick activity around the history of your name and discussion. So much has come out of just that activity. But these are small, short activities that you could do to just get to know each other a little bit better, just to start being a little bit more transparent with each other and a little bit more vulnerable. Because once we have that, that's when the empathy comes into place. That's when we're able to really connect with each other and realize, wow, we're a lot more similar than what we thought. And, those little biases start to slowly break away and move away because we're connecting with each other. And that's what this book, I wanted it to, to be about, was having that space to either do it as a group or do it individually, but really to spark conversation, to really have that deep dialogue.
Can you share with our listeners, our viewers, one point of advice around being free?
Absolutely. I just want everyone to know that this is your journey to take. This is your time to process stories, process experiences for yourself so that you can really enact true change in your personal and your professional life. This is your time to make that positive impact. And I thank you, Dr. Weaver.
Well, Dr. Melanie Dillett-Dukes, I just thank you for being a part of our show. And I want everybody to go out and get your book, My Freedom Journey, Be Free, Be Brave, Be Radical. I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver, and thank each of you for joining us on Working It Out. Have a safe, productive, and be happy week.
Working It Out is brought to you by Alignment Strategies, a management consultancy with more than 3 decades of experience in diversity, equity and inclusion, and organizational development. To learn more, visit alignmentstrategies.com.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.